Commander Vex Corvani adjusted his ceremonial collar for the third time this morning, because apparently even alien bureaucrats had nervous habits. The crystalline walls of the Galactic Intelligence Council's testing facility hummed with that particular frequency that said, "We're very important, and you should be impressed." Which, honestly, most species were. Another year, another batch of hopefuls begging for galactic citizenship. Vex muttered to his assistant, Counselor Thrix Melodin, who looked like someone had crossed a praying mantis with a filing cabinet. "Tell me, Thrix, what delightfully primitive species are we humoring today?" Thrix's compound eyes flickered through his holographic clipboard. "The usual suspects, Commander. The Blorvan Empire sent their best mathematician again, though we both know how that ended last time. The Crystalline Confederacy is making their 7th attempt, bless their translucent hearts. And then there's... Oh, this is interesting." "Do share," Vex said, settling into his observation throne with the enthusiasm of someone about to watch a particularly predictable comedy show. "A species calling themselves humans, from a backwater planet called Earth. Third spiral arm, barely out of their own solar system. They've got the audacity to request full membership status without even completing the preliminary cultural assessments." Vex's 4 eyebrows rose in perfect synchronization. How refreshingly arrogant. I do love when the primitives think they can skip the formalities. What's their claim to fame? Did they invent fire recently? Master the wheel, perhaps? According to their application, Thrix's mandibles clicked with barely contained amusement. They've achieved spaceflight, developed artificial intelligence, and apparently they've split something called an atom. Oh, and they've created something they call the Internet, which seems to be a global network for sharing pictures of small furry creatures and arguing about politics. "Fascinating," Vex drawled, though his tone suggested he found it about as fascinating as watching paint dry in a vacuum. "Well, let's not keep our eager little bipeds waiting. Send them in for the standard cognitive assessment. I give them 10 minutes before they're crying into their primitive communication devices." The testing chamber's main door iris dilated with a dramatic whoosh, because everything in galactic politics needed a certain theatrical flair. In walked Ambassador Jake Murphy, humanity's supposedly finest diplomatic mind, wearing what could only be described as his very best attempt at formal space attire, which looked suspiciously like a regular Earth business suit with some extra shiny buttons. "Greetings, esteemed members of the Galactic Intelligence Council," Jake announced, spreading his arms wide in what he clearly believed was a gesture of universal friendship. "I am Ambassador Jake Murphy, representing the proud people of Earth, and I'm here to prove that humanity deserves a seat at the big kids' table of galactic civilization." Vex exchanged a look with Thrix that could have powered a small spacecraft. The human had just compared the most prestigious governing body in the galaxy to a children's dining arrangement. This was going to be even more entertaining than he'd hoped. "Welcome, Ambassador Murphy," Vex said, his voice carrying just enough condescension to season a small moon. "I do hope you're prepared for our little examination. It's nothing too challenging, merely a test that stumped some of the galaxy's most advanced civilizations for centuries. I'm sure a species that's mastered the art of internet cat videos will have no trouble whatsoever." Jake's chest puffed out like a peacock who'd just been told he was pretty. "Commander Vex, with all due respect to your advanced civilizations, I think you'll find that human ingenuity is something special. We didn't climb to the top of Earth's food chain by backing down from a challenge." "How delightfully confident," Vex purred, gesturing toward a holographic display that materialized in the center of the chamber. "Behold, the Korvaxian sequence, a mathematical progression that encompasses 11 dimensions of space-time, incorporates quantum probability matrices, and requires an understanding of consciousness-based mathematics that transcends mere physical reality." The display showed a series of symbols that looked like someone had thrown alphabet soup at a quantum computer and asked it to make art. Numbers danced in impossible geometries, equations folded in on themselves. And somewhere in the middle, a particularly smug-looking mathematical symbol seemed to be winking. Jake stared at the display for approximately 15 seconds before nodding knowingly. "Right, okay, I see what you're going for here. Very clever. This is obviously a trick question." "A trick question?" Thrix's mandibles clicked rapidly, which in his species indicated either amusement or the early stages of digestive distress. "Absolutely," Jake said, rolling up his sleeves like he was about to arm wrestle the universe. "See, the pattern is clearly based on Earth's Fibonacci sequence, but you've complicated it with all this fancy alien math to throw me off. The answer is obviously 42. The silence that followed could have been bottled and sold as a premium awkwardness vintage. Several council members who had been casually observing suddenly snapped to attention, their various eye stalks, antennae, and sensory organs swiveling toward Jake like he'd just announced he was made of cheese. 42, Vex repeated slowly, as if he were trying to understand a foreign concept like humility or reasonable insurance premiums. Well, maybe 43 if you carry the 1, Jake added helpfully. Look, I know you aliens like to overcomplicate things, but sometimes the simplest answer is the right one. We humans have a saying, keep it simple, stupid. Though I'm not calling you stupid, Commander. That would be diplomatically inappropriate. Counselor Zorton Blix, a crystalline being who looked like a chandelier with attitude problems, chimed in with what could generously be called musical laughter. Commander Vex, this primitive actually believes that consciousness-based mathematics can be solved with basic arithmetic and random number guessing. To be fair, added researcher Plex Vorthak, whose multiple brains were visible through his transparent skull, the Grugnarian slugs at least attempted to use calculus before they failed. This human seems to think the universe operates on the same principles as his species' television game shows. Jake's confident smile began to waver like a Wi-Fi signal in a thunderstorm. Okay, maybe it's not 42. Is it, 7? 7's a lucky number where I come from. Very mathematical. Prime number, actually. Vex's satisfaction was so thick you could have served it at a dinner party. Ambassador Murphy, I'm afraid your species has demonstrated exactly what we expected. Humans are clearly another example of evolutionary ambition exceeding intellectual capacity. We see it constantly. Species that develop just enough technology to reach space but lack the cognitive sophistication for true galactic citizenship. The Blorvin made the same mistake, Thrix added, consulting his notes. Overconfidence paired with fundamental misunderstanding of higher dimensional mathematics. They are currently classified as a Level 2 civilization, suitable for trade agreements and tourist visas, but certainly not council membership. Jake's face had gone through several interesting color changes that weren't typically found in human complexions. Now wait just a minute here. One math problem doesn't represent all of human intelligence. We've got some pretty smart people back home. We invented smartphones, space stations, and something called quantum computing that I don't entirely understand, but sounds very impressive. I'm afraid the assessment is quite conclusive, Vex began, already reaching for his rejection paperwork with the kind of bureaucratic satisfaction that could power a small space station. Humans will be classified as... The chamber's secondary entrance burst open with all the subtlety of a supernova at a library reading. In strode Dr. Luna Waverly, marine biologist extraordinaire, looking like she'd just stepped out of a hurricane and decided she'd like the aesthetic. Her hair was doing things that defied several laws of physics. Her lab coat bore the battle scars of serious scientific work, and she was dragging what appeared to be a mobile water tank behind her. Sorry I'm late, Luna announced to the room at large, completely ignoring the fact that she'd just interrupted the galaxy's most prestigious governing body. Traffic was murder, and then Flipper here decided he needed to inspect every single airlock seal between the shuttle and your facility. You know how Dolphins are about water pressure safety. The silence that followed was different from Jake's previous awkward pause. This was more of a "did she just say what I think she said" variety of silence, seasoned with a healthy dose of "is that what I think it is?" Because bobbing contentedly in the mobile tank was indeed a dolphin. Not a holographic dolphin, not some alien creature that vaguely resembled a dolphin, but an honest-to-goodness Earth dolphin, complete with that perpetual smile that suggested he knew something the rest of the room didn't. Dr. Waverly, Jake hissed, clearly trying to salvage what remained of human dignity. This is a formal intelligence assessment, not bring your pet to work day. Luna fixed him with the kind of look that marine biologists reserved for people who thought goldfish were low-maintenance pets. Pet? Ambassador Murphy, meet Flipper, my research partner and quite possibly the most intelligent mammal I've ever worked with. He's published more peer-reviewed papers than most tenured professors, though, admittedly, he needs help with the typing. Commander Vex's 4 eyebrows were now doing complicated geometric patterns that would have impressed the Crystalline Confederacy's best mathematicians. Dr. Waverly, I must admit I'm somewhat confused. You've brought an aquatic creature to a cognitive assessment designed for spacefaring species? Well, Luna said, settling into a chair that definitely hadn't been designed for human anatomy. Jake here is supposed to be representing human intelligence, right? But here's the thing, Commander, and this might come as a shock to your obviously superior galactic perspective. Humans aren't actually the smartest species on Earth. The sound Counselor Thrix made could best be described as a filing cabinet having an existential crisis. Excuse me? Oh, don't get me wrong, Luna continued, giving Jake a pat on the shoulder that was probably meant to be comforting, but came across more like consoling a golden retriever who'd failed obedience school. Humans are clever enough. We're great at making tools, arguing about things we don't understand, and turning perfectly good planets into reality TV shows. But smartest? That's adorable. Flipper chose that moment to emit a series of clicks and whistles that sounded suspiciously like laughter. Several council members' translation devices began smoking, apparently unable to process dolphin humor. Your aquatic companion seems amused by our proceedings, Vex observed, though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely sure if he was being mocked by a fish. Flipper finds alien bureaucracy hilarious, Luna explained matter-of-factly. He says it reminds him of the territorial disputes between sea cucumber colonies. Lots of posturing, very little substance. The holographic display of the Corvaxian sequence continued to hover in the center of the room, its mathematical symbols still performing their impossible dance. Flipper's attention seemed drawn to it, his echolocation clicks becoming more frequent and purposeful as he studied the display with the kind of focus that suggested actual comprehension rather than casual interest. Commander Vex straightened in his throne, clearly ready to deliver the bureaucratic death blow to humanity's galactic ambitions. Well, this has been quite entertaining, but I'm afraid we must conclude this assessment. Humans, despite their charming confidence and apparent fondness for bringing pets to formal proceedings, have demonstrated a fundamental lack of... A series of rapid-fire clicks erupted from Flipper's tank, so complex and precisely timed that several council members' universal translators started displaying error messages. The Dolphins' sonar pulses weren't random. They were forming patterns, mathematical sequences that seemed to resonate with the holographic display itself. What in the 7 spiral arms is that creature doing? Counselor Thrix demanded, his compound eyes swiveling frantically between Flipper and his malfunctioning translation device. Luna's eyebrows shot up in genuine surprise. Oh, that's interesting. Flipper, are you reading their math problem? The Dolphin's response was a rapid burst of clicks, followed by what could only be described as an exasperated sigh. Then, something extraordinary happened. The holographic display began to shimmer and shift, its impossible geometries responding to Flipper's echolocation patterns, like a lock recognizing the correct key. That's not possible, Research Counselor Plake's Vortak whispered, his multiple brains visible through his transparent skull, all focusing intently on the display. The Corvaxian sequence requires consciousness-based mathematical processing. That creature is just making noise. But the noise was becoming increasingly structured. Flipper's clicks formed complex harmonic patterns that seemed to map directly onto the 11-dimensional mathematics floating before them. Each sonar pulse corresponded to a specific variable in the equation, and as the Dolphin's vocalizations grew more intricate, the display began solving itself. Flipper's using echolocation to process the spatial relationships, Luna breathed, her scientific excitement overriding diplomatic protocol entirely. Of course, Dolphins navigate 3-dimensional space using sound-based mathematics in real time. Their brains are literally hardwired for multi-dimensional calculation. The mathematical symbols in the display were now moving in perfect synchronization with Flipper's sonar patterns. Quantum probability matrices unfolded like origami flowers. Consciousness-based variables aligned themselves into elegant solutions, and the entire 11-dimensional sequence began to resolve into a beautiful, harmonious whole. Commander Vex had gone completely still, which in his species indicated either deep contemplation or complete system failure. The sequence, it's actually solving itself, but that would mean... Flipper emitted one final, triumphant click, a sound that somehow managed to convey both mathematical satisfaction and mild smugness. The holographic display flashed brilliant white for a moment, then settled into a stable, completed configuration that pulsed gently with solved equations. The silence that followed wasn't just awkward, it was the kind of profound quiet that occurs when everyone's fundamental understanding of reality suddenly needs major renovations. Did a dolphin just solve the Corvaxian sequence? Counselor Zortan Blix asked, his crystalline form refracting the hologram's light into rainbow patterns that somehow looked confused. Luna checked her waterproof tablet, scrolling through streams of data that Flipper's performance had generated. Not just solved it. He solved it in approximately 47 seconds, identified 3 computational shortcuts that your original programmers missed, and I think he just improved the efficiency of your consciousness mathematics interface by about 30%. Jake's mouth was opening and closing like he was trying to impersonate a fish, which under the circumstances was either deeply ironic or oddly appropriate. But But he's just a dolphin. Just a dolphin? Luna's voice carried the kind of professional indignation usually reserved for people who called the ocean a big puddle. Ambassador Murphy, Flipper's brain processes acoustic information through neural pathways that make your quantum computers look like pocket calculators. He navigates in 3 dimensions using mathematical calculations that would make your GPS system weep with inadequacy. Flipper, perhaps sensing the room's stunned atmosphere, performed what could only be described as a victory lap in his tank. His characteristic dolphin grin seemed wider than usual, and his occasional clicks now sounded distinctly like chuckling. Research Counselor Vorthak's multiple brains were working overtime, visible thoughts racing through his transparent cranium like hyperactive goldfish. This changes everything. If one of their non-dominant species can solve consciousness-based mathematics using biological computation, then Earth's cognitive diversity is unprecedented in our galactic records, Vex finished quietly, his pompous demeanor deflating like a punctured spacesuit. For the first time in the assessment, he was looking at the humans, all the humans, including the one with fins, with something approaching respect. Luna leaned back in her chair with the satisfaction of someone who just watched the universe's smuggest pop quiz get thoroughly demolished by a marine mammal. Commander Vex, with all due respect to your galactic intelligence assessment protocols, I think there might be a tiny flaw in your methodology. A flaw? Vex's voice cracked slightly, which was impressive considering his species communicated through harmonic resonance chambers. Well, yes. You're testing for intelligence, using a very specific type of mathematical reasoning, symbolic manipulation of abstract concepts in 11 dimensions. It's brilliant, don't get me wrong, but it's also just one tiny slice of what intelligence actually looks like. Luna gestured toward Flipper, who is now floating contentedly, and occasionally clicking what sounded suspiciously like dolphin laughter. Flipper here doesn't think in symbols or equations, he thinks in spatial relationships, acoustic geometries, and 3-dimensional sound maps that update in real time. She stood up and began pacing, which was apparently a universal sign of Professor Mode activating because several council members instinctively leaned forward. Let me tell you about Earth intelligence, because clearly your xenobiologists have been phoning it in. We've got octopuses that can solve puzzles by changing their skin color to match mathematical patterns. 8-armed problem solvers with distributed brains who treat each tentacle like an independent processing unit. Counselor Thrick's mandibles were clicking frantically as he took notes. Distributed neural networks? That's theoretically possible, but we've never encountered. Oh, we're just getting started, Luna interrupted with the kind of gleeful enthusiasm that made Jake take a small step backward. We've got African gray parrots who understand 0 as a mathematical concept and can count in sequence while making jokes about their handlers. Crows that use tools to make better tools, which is more than most civilizations manage in their first 1,000 years of development. Research Counselor Plix Vorthak's multiple brains were practically glowing with excitement. Tool recursion indicates second-order abstract thinking. What's their cranial capacity? About the size of a walnut, Luna said cheerfully, causing Plix to make a sound like a computer blue screening. Then, we've got elephants with memory systems so sophisticated they pass down cultural knowledge across generations without any written language. They have funeral rituals, Commander Vex. They mourn their dead and visit elephant graveyards to pay respects to ancestors they never met. The holographic display was still pulsing with Flipper's solution, casting shifting patterns of light across the chamber, as Luna continued her impromptu lecture on terrestrial cognitive diversity. Whales, she continued, warming to her subject like a campfire fed fresh kindling, compose songs that travel across entire ocean basins, complex musical structures that evolve and change as they spread from pod to pod, like a planetary-scale cultural telephone game that's been running for millions of years. They're basically running the world's longest continuous artistic collaboration. Commander Vex was staring at Luna with the expression of someone whose entire professional worldview was being systematically dismantled and rebuilt. Dr. Waverly, are you telling me that your planet has multiple species capable of abstract reasoning, cultural transmission, and complex problem-solving? Multiple? Luna laughed, a sound that somehow managed to be both delighted and slightly unhinged. Commander, we've got honeybees that communicate spatial information through interpretive dance. They literally choreograph directions to food sources using geometric patterns that account for solar positioning and temporal changes. Ants that build living bridges out of their own bodies to solve logistics problems that would challenge your best engineers. Flipper chose that moment to emit a long, complex whistle that Luna's tablet immediately began translating. She glanced at the screen and grinned. Flipper says I'm underselling the Dolphins, Apparently, they've been eavesdropping on human sonar experiments for decades and have developed their own theories about quantum mechanics. He wants to know if any of your species have figured out how to use sound waves for faster-than-light communication, because he has some ideas. The council chamber had gone so quiet you could have heard a black hole evaporating. Jake was staring at Luna with the expression of someone who'd just discovered his planet was way cooler than he'd realized. Dr. Waverly, Vex said slowly, if Earth possesses such cognitive diversity, why did your species send Ambassador Murphy to represent you? Luna shot Jake an apologetic look that somehow made everything worse. Well, humans are really good at space travel and formal diplomatic procedures. We're excellent at bureaucracy, technological development, and explaining things to other humans. We're just not necessarily the best at, well, multi-dimensional mathematics solved through biological echolocation. So you brought the Dolphin as backup, Counselor Zortan Blix observed, his crystalline form still refracting confused-looking rainbow patterns. I brought Flipper because he's my research partner and he gets cranky when left alone on spaceships, Luna corrected. The fact that he's apparently better at your intelligence tests than most galactic civilizations is just a happy coincidence. Though honestly, after watching him navigate underwater obstacle courses while composing what I can only describe as mathematical poetry, I probably should have seen this coming. Commander Vex stood slowly, his ceremonial collar suddenly looking less like a symbol of authority and more like a fancy necklace he'd forgotten he was wearing. The holographic display continued to pulse with Flipper's elegant solution, casting shifting mathematical equations across the chamber walls, like the universe's most sophisticated mood lighting. Council members, Vex began, his voice carrying none of its earlier pompous certainty. I believe we need to completely restructure our understanding of intelligence assessment. We've been testing for one very specific type of cognitive ability, symbolic mathematical manipulation, while ignoring the vast spectrum of what consciousness and intelligence actually encompass. Research Counselor Plix Vorthex multiple brains were practically vibrating with excitement behind his transparent skull. Commander, the implications are staggering. If Earth represents this level of cognitive diversity within a single biosphere, we need to reconsider our entire approach to first contact protocols. We've been looking for civilizations that think like us, when we should be looking for civilizations that think. Counselor Thrix was frantically updating his holographic clipboard, his mandibles clicking in what Luna was beginning to recognize as bureaucratic panic. We'll need to revise the standard cognitive assessment, develop new testing protocols for non-symbolic intelligence, create diplomatic frameworks for multi-species representation, and, oh my filing systems, we'll need entirely new categories in our civilization database. Luna watched the alien bureaucrats scramble to reorganize their worldview, and felt a familiar warmth in her chest, the same feeling she got when a particularly stubborn research grant finally got approved. If it helps, Commander, I've got about 15 years of documentation on interspecies communication protocols. Flipper and I have been working on a translation matrix for Dolphin mathematical concepts. Turns out they've got some fascinating insights into fluid dynamics and acoustic engineering. Flipper responded with a series of clicks that Luna's tablet translated as something roughly equivalent to, finally, someone who gets it, followed by what appeared to be a technical critique of the council chamber's acoustic design. He says your sound dampening system is creating interference patterns in the lower frequency ranges, Luna reported. Apparently it's giving him a headache. Also, he wants to know if any of your species have figured out how to use echolocation for medical diagnosis, because he's got some ideas about non-invasive surgery techniques. Commander Vex's 4 eyebrows were performing complex geometric patterns again, but this time they looked more like impressed confusion than bureaucratic disdain. Dr. Waverly, would your colleague be interested in a consulting position? We have several ongoing projects that could benefit from his unique perspective. The sound that emerged from Flipper's tank could only be described as delighted cackling. Luna checked her tablet and grinned. He says he'd be honored to help, but he has some conditions. First, all meetings need to be held in facilities with proper aquatic accommodations. Second, he wants full credit on any publications that result from his contributions. And third, he insists that Earth be granted not just membership, but special status as the galaxy's first multi-species civilization. Multi-species civilization? Counselor Zortan Blix asked, his crystalline form refracting what looked like cautiously interested light patterns. That's not a category we've ever considered. Well, Jake said, finally finding his voice after spending most of the session looking like he'd been hit with a theoretical physics textbook. Maybe it should be. I mean, I came here thinking I was representing humanity. But apparently I was just representing the species that happened to develop space travel first. Maybe that's the wrong way to think about it. Muna looked at Jake with something approaching approval, which was probably the closest thing to a diplomatic victory he was going to get out of this experience. Ambassador Murphy makes a good point. Earth's strength isn't that we have one really smart species, it's that we have dozens of different types of intelligence all sharing the same planet and, increasingly, learning to work together. Commander Vex began pacing, his steps echoing in the chamber with the kind of rhythm that suggested deep thinking rather than nervous energy. A civilization defined not by the achievements of a single species, but by the cognitive diversity of an entire biosphere. It's unprecedented, but then again, so is everything else about this assessment. Think about the possibilities, Research Counselor Plix Vorthek added, his multiple brains all focused on the same fascinating problem. Engineering projects that combine human technological innovation with dolphin acoustic mathematics and octopus problem-solving creativity. Scientific research that incorporates elephant memory systems and whale communication networks. We could be looking at the most cognitively robust civilization in galactic history. Flipper emitted a long, complex whistle that Luna's tablet struggled to translate. She frowned at the screen, then laughed. He says, that's all very flattering, but Earth species have been collaborating for millions of years. Humans are just the first ones arrogant enough to think we invented the concept of teamwork. The laughter that rippled through the council chamber was different from their earlier condescending chuckles. This was the kind of laughter that happened when you realized you'd been taking yourself too seriously, and the universe had just handed you a much more interesting problem to solve. Dr. Waverly, Ambassador Murphy, Commander Vex said formally, though his tone carried warmth that hadn't been there at the beginning of the session. On behalf of the Galactic Intelligence Council, I would like to extend an invitation for Earth to join our confederation. Not as a single-species member, but as our first multi-species civilization. We have much to learn from your planet's approach to intelligence and cooperation. Jake straightened his shoulders, looking more dignified than he had since walking into the chamber. Commander Vex, on behalf of Earth's human governments, I accept your invitation. Though I should probably mention that we'll need to run this past the dolphins, whales, elephants, and probably the octopuses before we make it official. Turns out, democracy gets complicated when your civilization includes that many sentient species. Flipper's response was a triumphant whistle, followed by what sounded distinctly like applause, if applause could be performed using sonar and tremendous enthusiasm. Luna gathered her notes and began preparing Flipper's transport tank for departure. Well, this has been educational for everyone involved. Flipper wants me to tell you that he's enjoyed meeting you all, and he looks forward to working with the Council on what he calls finally bringing some real intelligence to galactic politics. As the Earth delegation prepared to leave, Commander Vex watched them go with the expression of someone whose universe had just become infinitely more interesting and slightly more humble. The holographic display continued to pulse with Flipper's mathematical solution, a constant reminder that intelligence comes in forms more wonderful and diverse than any bureaucracy could imagine. Thrix, Vex said quietly to his assistant, make a note in our files. Earth, cognitive diversity beyond measurement. Assessment result. They're not just ready for galactic citizenship, they're going to teach the rest of us what citizenship actually means.